going to be talking about communication, and not only just communication, but communication styles. All right. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients is really centered around talking, like how they talk to people, how other people talk to them, how not to let things that people say get under their skin and upset them. So communication is really the foundation of so many of the interactions that we have. And so again, on theme with what I'm doing on my business Instagram, which is discussing, I'm sorry, I just ate, got a little, y'all know how it be. Anyway, but just discussing the many components that comes into how we come to be the communicators that we are. So one thing that I always think is important to talk about is, where does it start? Like, we don't learn how to communicate on our own. We learn that from our parents, our family, our caregivers, the people that we spend a lot of time around. And so unfortunately, if they are bad communicators, what you think we gonna be? A bad communicator by nature. And that's not to say that we can't change that, but I get so tired of hearing people talk about how, that they know they bad at communicating and they don't do nothing about it. So when we gonna change? Like, we just gonna keep acknowledging that we are poor at communicating and continue to do that? Like, no, it's time that we kind of look at ourselves, gain a little bit of self-awareness to understand how we can improve better. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the communication styles are, what they look like, and then strategies for how you can communicate better. We're going to keep it straight, simple, to the point. So communication styles are really just descriptors of how we tend to share our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas with other people. We have to remember, it's not always what we're saying, like what we're communicating, but communication involves our body language, our tone, our inflection, our level of voice, and so really, when we have misunderstandings and conflicts, most of that comes from the fact that we're not communicating. Like, I'm relaying a message, you're not receiving it the way in which I intend, and vice versa. Or we're communicating in a very aggressive way, which nobody's going to be open to receiving. So again, just something to be conscious of. So in general, there are 4 communication styles, and I'll actually be using something that I typically use in group to go over this. Just have someone like my notes of things that I don't want to forget while mentioning this. But okay, so let's talk about the 4 styles. We have assertive, which is the ideal, right? That's how we want to be assertive. Assertive communicators are very good at being direct, at being honest, but also being considerate, being compassionate, being empathetic. They think about who their audience is. They think about what it is that they're actually feeling and how can they communicate that in a way that is most effective and efficient. Before I keep going, another aspect of being an assertive communicator is you can kind of keep it together when you're hearing things that you don't want to hear, or when people are talking like crazy, but we talking outside of their neck. Like, when people coming at you strong, an assertive communicator can keep it together. They can understand that, like, I have a goal in this conversation. And something else I should mention, I'm going to stop right here real quick, is the fact that usually the way we communicate is also very telling of the type of boundaries that we have. So eventually I'm going to do a video on boundaries and the type of boundaries that people typically have. But if I am an assertive communicator, it is very likely that I have healthy, strong boundaries, because pretty much the way that they tie into one another is the fact that an assertive communicator is comfortable expressing what they need, what they want, what they're not going to deal with, and they do it in a way that is respectful to the other person. So again, our boundaries are reflections of what we won't tolerate, what we need from people, what we're willing to give. And the other piece of that is being, not only knowing that mentally, but being able to communicate that to other people. Not just, when you call me, I'm not answering the phone no more, but being able to assertively communicate that when you call me, I feel like I'm stressed out. Or when you call me, I get overwhelmed. So, formulating that in a better way versus like, when you call me, I'm not answering the phone. All right. So, assertive communicators, they listen openly to others. They are prepared to compromise and problem solve. They don't get wrapped up in a lot of which is, again, goes back to boundaries. When you know that you're going into a conversation with somebody and it's going left, an assertive person, a person with good boundaries, is going to say, hey, I feel like we are not hearing each other and this conversation isn't going where I want it to go. So how about we take a step back and we come back when we're in a better headspace? They're not going to continue to go and go and go and go. And then, emotions are rising and then both parties are overwhelmed and nobody is really getting across what they want to get across. So as far as body language, they make good eye contact, they have good posture, they appear confident, they know what they want, they know what they need, and they're going to do a good job at just getting that across to people. People that are assertive communicators just in general are more well-liked. They're better equipped at handling conversation, and they tend to be better at regulating their emotions. So it's not just like the fact that they can speak well, it's the fact that they are in tune with themselves enough to know what and how to make a conversation as effective and as healthy as it should be. So that's style number one, assertive. The second style is passive. So people who are passive, like when you hear passive in general, you think of a certain type of person, and that kind of translates over into communication. So whether a person has passive boundaries or they're a passive communicator, they essentially want to avoid conflict and confrontation. These are people pleasers. These are people who are going to tell you what you want to hear for the sake of keeping the peace. They're not going to rock the boat. They're just going to, but at the expense of themselves. So it's not that a passive communicator is just quiet or shy. It's the fact that they do not feel comfortable speaking up for themselves. They do not self-advocate. And usually, again, that comes from a place of feeling like if I say this, somebody's not going to like me. Like they're very concerned with being liked, with being agreeable. They want people to, they don't want to cause a fuss. So they're just willing to kind of go along with things, even when they're not really satisfied with what's going on. They don't consider what it is that they need or what they feel. And they're usually very quiet about that. They also can hide and deny their true feelings by any means necessary, because they don't want to disappoint other people. They don't want to make anybody upset. And the unfortunate part about this is the fact that when you are a passive communicator, usually there's a lot of resentment that builds up. When people are quiet and they don't speak up for themselves, we know that only happens for so long, because once they build and they build and they build and they build, unfortunately what ends up happening is they either have a reaction that they don't want, they blurt out something, or they go off because they've been holding all this stuff in and not saying anything, or it starts to literally stress them out to the point where, like, if you don't get stuff off your chest, that affects you physically, So there is a lot that can happen when you are a passive communicator. And so essentially, even with body language, they lack eye contact. They may be slumped or closed off. They may speak in a very soft or quiet tone. And it just becomes hard for people to take them seriously. So I tell, people who are quiet by nature, like, it's okay to be a quiet or a shy person. However, when it's time to communicate, when it's time to advocate for yourself, you want to let people know you're not the one to play with. Like, you want to be able to speak up in those moments. So that's the second style. The third style is passive aggressiveness. Now, this tends to be the style that we are more familiar with, like being able to pinpoint. And pretty much a person that is a passive aggressive communicator will often use humor, jokes to say something that they really want to say without having to deal with the confrontation of it. So if I make a joke about you that is low key, it's mean, but I'm disguising it as a joke, then I can say what I really feel without having to worry about there being a potential conflict. But really, out of all the styles, being passive aggressive is probably the worst style, because it's a combination of the two more inefficient styles. So passive and aggressive, like you got the worst of both worlds in one style. And so They'll throw hints to get their point across. You know, people that just aren't very direct. Like, you could tell they got something on their mind, but they ain't gonna come out and say it. And it's like you want to say it for them. Like, what you got to say? And then the thing about passive aggressive communicators is usually when you give them the opportunity, like when you call it out, like, I feel like you're trying to say X, Y, Z. Instead of saying, well, yeah, I do kind of feel like that, they're going to be like, no, that's not what I'm saying. So they don't even take the opportunity to really talk about what's on their mind without, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought that fast. They don't take the opportunity to express what's on their mind, even when given, you know, an open floor to talk about it. And that's one thing I'm going to say. I have my own, you know, I've had to catch myself in my own passive aggressive behaviors, but I do a good job of really trying to get people who communicate that way to really search for what's underneath, because it can be difficult to talk to somebody who won't just say what's on their mind, or they say it in a very, you know, not just passive aggressive, but a snarky way that can rub you the wrong way. I'll give you an example. So, my dad can sometimes be passive aggressive, right? So it was one time I was on the phone with my mom, and he'll do stuff like this, like just come out the blue and say something that is just so off topic. And so one time he was on the phone, he was like, I was on the phone with my mom, and he pops in and is like, y'all gonna look up and y'all phone's gonna be off. And I'm like, you know, me trying to be a better communicator, old me would have been like, man, what are you even talking about? Like, you know, I would have caught an attitude. But me trying to work on my communication, I said, let me listen for the message underneath the passive aggressiveness, right? Because typically, there's always a message underneath what they're saying. So instead of getting offended, instead of taking his approach personally, because that's what you have to do when you're trying to be a better communicator, is you have to sometimes account for the fact that other people are poor communicators, but that don't mean they got to pull that side out of you. So I said, what is he really trying to say? He's trying to say, you know, because we're all on a family plan. He was paying for most of it at the time. He was paying for it at the time. What you're trying to say is you need some help with the phone bill. Like, me knowing my dad, me knowing that he's telling me that our phone's getting ready to cut off, it has to do with the fact that he's carrying the responsibility of paying for everybody's phone, and he doesn't want to do that anymore. But instead of just saying that, he gets passive aggressive. So I say, you know, Daddy, what I'm hearing is you would like for us to start pitching in on the phone bill. Well, okay, I hear you. So what you're saying is, you know, you would like us to start contributing. And that brought him from a 10 back down to a 5, you know, where we can have a conversation about this. And I told him, I said, you don't have to be passive aggressive. Like, if that's what you need, then just say that. But that is just one instance in how he was trying to get a need met. And that's the thing. People who are passive aggressive, they try to get their needs met in very ineffective ways. So instead of just coming out and saying what they need, which can feel vulnerable for them, they try to throw it in as a jab or something that you can kind of get the point. But again, it's not, it doesn't leave room for us to have a very constructive conversation. Usually it leaves people uninterested in having the conversation completely, which you have to consider. And the last style is aggressive. So an aggressive communicator, they go into interactions feeling like they got to win. Ain't no compromise. They are right and you are wrong. And it can be very difficult communicating with somebody in that stance because they don't see any error in their ways. They're too busy trying to show that, you know, it's their way or the highway to even reason with other people. The thing about aggressive communicators, they don't cater their message to their audience. They will talk to their mama like somebody on the street. And that's one thing that I particularly don't like is I feel like when you talk to people, you have to cater your message or whatever it is you're trying to communicate to that person. Now, it's not to say that, you know, you have to necessarily silence or police yourself when you speak, but you should be a little conscious of, you know, if I'm mad, I'm not going to talk to my boyfriend or my girlfriend or a friend or somebody I care about the same way I would talk to a stranger who I have no relationship with. I hope that makes sense. But aggressive communicators, they prioritize their thoughts, their feelings, and they just have a complete disregard for other people. They have a hard time listening. These are the type of people, they're going to cut you off. They're going to talk over you. They can come off intimidating when they speak to you. So just very closed off, loud, harsh tone, intimidating gestures. And one thing I always think is important to point out is the fact that there is a difference between being an aggressive communicator and being an assertive communicator. Women, unfortunately, because history tells us that we were supposed to be passive and these very quiet, timid beings, when a woman is assertive, it is more likely that she's going to get accused of being aggressive. And this is me, like my own personal experience in instances where I knew like I was just being very direct or in setting a boundary or, setting a boundary most of the time. And people don't like that. So then it's, oh, she's aggressive. That's what, look, if you ain't watched my story on why I got fired, all of this had to do with that, because it's not okay enough for a Black woman in the workplace to be assertive and to have boundaries and to communicate herself in a confident way. It has to make other people feel intimidated. But that's another chat for another time. But there is a difference. And the difference is people who are assertive, they're going to consider who they're talking to. They're going to have some compassion, some consideration, and some empathy when they talk to you, So just to make sure that I didn't leave anything out. Aggressive communicators, they don't have much sensitivity, and I don't like when people are like, I'm just honest. I'm just direct. Are you really? Or are you condescending and just mean or rude? Like those things matter. So it's not that. I think assertive is a nice balance because it's you speaking up for yourself, but it's also you doing it in a way that isn't necessarily threatening or intimidating to another person. So something else that goes along with just the styles is thinking about, how did we get this way, right? So we already talked about the fact that our parents, our family, they shape the type of communicators we become. So I'm going to briefly kind of go through and talk about how certain styles can come about. So people who are assertive communicators, they typically come from home environments where their caregivers gave them the space to express themselves. They didn't police what they said. They weren't strict about, what they could say and what they couldn't say. So many of us have grown up feeling like we cannot express ourselves. And it's because somewhere along the way, an adult usually in our life told us that we could not. And so we carried that. And so it's really important if you want to, especially those of you all who are parents, if you want your child to be an assertive communicator, you also you really want to foster a space for them to express themselves in a very, I'm sorry, lost my train of thought. I'm doing that a lot today. You just want to give them the room to express themselves in a non-judgmental, manner. Okay, so they also were taught the importance of self-advocacy and practicing that, right? Because that's the thing, is assertive communicators are good at speaking up for themselves and considering what they need out of a situation, while also considering the needs of others. So it's just important, like if you want to foster that in your kids, you just have to give them the space and not necessarily say, no, you shouldn't say that. But it's not that they, not teaching them what's wrong or what's right to say in certain situations or what's appropriate, but it's all about how you do it. Passive communicators, they were the types who were probably told, to be seen and not heard. They typically grew up in homes where their caregivers were just very strict in policing what they could and couldn't say or express. As far as their parents, it's very likely that a passive person has parents who are either aggressive communicators, so again, that shut them down, or they had a parent that was either aggressive and dominant, or they had a parent that was passive or passive aggressive. So that can be very confusing, and that's the same thing when we talk about passive aggressive communicators, is their parents could have that same dynamic, which can be very confusing, right? So you may even learn gender. That's something else I wanted to mention. Gender plays a huge role in how we come to communicate, because there are certain ideologies that exist as far as like who can say what. Men are allowed to be more aggressive, but the moment a woman is aggressive, it's a problem, or if she's assertive, then it's called aggressive. But men can be called aggressive and nobody blinks an eye. So if you were raised in a household that really upheld gender roles, you may have seen like your mom be more of a quiet, passive, let your dad kind of do whatever he wanted to do, didn't really speak up for herself. And so seeing these contrasting communicators can cause some confusion in a person's life, because it's like, am I allowed to speak up for myself or no? Because I got one parent that does it and then I got another one that does. So it's very likely that, like, just in general, the adults in their life diminish their self-esteem and their confidence, and all of that goes together. If you're not confident in who you are, you're not going to be able to be an assertive communicator, because you're always going to be second guessing, doubting, being concerned with the opinions of other people based on what it is that you say. All right, so passive aggressive communicators, again, usually these were the type of kids who grew up trying to speak up for themselves, and then the authority figures or the adults in their life shut them down and told them like that, pretty much ingrained the idea that what they had to say was not valuable, that it was not important. And so because they have like that inner fire in them, like a part of them wants to advocate. They want to speak up for themselves. They may even like have like this facade of confidence, right? But the other side of them feels like if I say something or if I speak my mind, it will not be received in a good way, or people will judge me, or people will say things to try to refute it. So I try to say what I want to say, but I try to do it in a sneaky way, because I don't think that people are going to listen to me. They usually have experienced just a pattern of interactions where people have disregarded their efforts to try to express themselves, whether they be talking over them or, just diminishing what they had to say. And another thing is, it's very likely that they witnessed the adults in their life use jokes to navigate conflict. So most of us have been in a situation with somebody where it should be a serious conversation, but the person like keep making jokes, or like they trying to lighten the mood and stuff like that. And so that can also kind of work its way into being a passive aggressive communicator. And lastly, so aggressive communicators, usually they grew up witnessing other people use aggression to get their needs met. Like they're seeing, okay, if I do that or I act that way, then it's most likely like it's likely that somebody is going to do what I want them to do. And so they pick up very early on that by like demeaning or humiliating other people communicatively, they can get their agreements, or they can have power and control over other people. Again, it's very possible that they came from homes where either where their caregivers were even passive. So if your caregivers were passive and you learn very early on how to get your way through manipulation or through pushing boundaries, that's how you start to translate with other people. So like if I have passive adults in my life who all I got to do is kind of like push them and they do whatever I tell them to do, you learn to start doing that with everybody else. Because the goal is to get a need met, so they have learned very early on how to take advantage of getting their needs met by exerting aggression to their caregivers. So they damn sure gonna do it with everybody else. And usually they just have a lack of like just being taught empathy and compassion and considering other people. And so in some ways, like we just aren't totally responsible for how we communicate, but it is our job to look at how is that affecting my interactions with other people. Because if you are a poor communicator, or you do certain things, people are going to pick up on it. And a huge part of this is just thinking about self-awareness, like catching yourself in the act. So I have another example. I was talking to this guy and a while ago. He lived out of state. And so it would be times where like he would come, we would kick it or whatever, and he would leave. And when I would try to follow up with him, like after he got back, maybe the day he, of course the same day he was supposed to land, like, did you make it or whatever? He wouldn't respond as quickly as I needed him, so it was one time where he left, went back. I sent the follow-up text. I hadn't heard from him. So here's the next day, and I'm agitated. I'm like, wow, like, why wouldn't he have texted me back? I'm just trying to make sure you okay. So my first instinct was to be passive aggressive, because that's something else I want to point out. I'm going to circle back to this. Passive aggressiveness, we do that, them subliminal social media posts, passive aggressive. So I'm like, my first instinct is to text him and be like, so you can't text nobody back? That's like, thoughts like that are passive aggressive. So I stopped for a second though, because I thought about, if I say this like that, it is very likely that he's going to read that and he's not going to want to talk to me. He's not going to want to talk to me. He's going to get agitated at the fact that I came at him like that. He's going to feel attacked. He's going to get defensive, you know? So sometimes we have to think about, how do I need to say this in a way that's going to be received well by the other party? Even if it's something negative, even if it's because you pissed off, you know, you want to open the space for you all to have a constructive conversation, and you cannot do that if you done pissed the person off before the conversation even started. So I used what's called an I feel statement, which I'm going to talk about next. Because at this point, I was like teaching this group to people. So I'm like, I should be able to implement this stuff. I can't keep falling back into old patterns, which is number one to changing your communication, is catching yourself in the moment. So instead of sending that text saying, so you can't text nobody back, I said, and don't quote me on this exactly, I said, I feel, it's not going to be exact, but pretty much, I feel hurt when you get back to town and don't follow up with me, because I'm just trying to make sure that you made it in okay. And I probably said something else too, along the lines of the fact that, like, when you're intimate with somebody and they kind of leave and you don't hear from them, that's not a good feeling. Like, I can honestly say that. So that's pretty much what I said. It's like, it doesn't feel good when, like, we spend all this great time together and then you leave and then you kind of, like, aren't as responsive as I would like. And, you know, he responded and he was like, you're right. My bad. And that's all I could ask for, is the recognition that that's not really okay, you know, and I don't like it. But I didn't have to do that by being passive aggressive, because had I said what I wanted to say, he probably wouldn't have said nothing to me, and I would have just still been sitting there looking stupid and mad. But that gave me some relief to the situation. I was able to kind of put my anger in its box and put it away for another day, because he was able to at least recognize and be accountable for the fact that, like, yeah, that's not okay how you moving. So, moving on to I feel statements. So, let me find the post. All right. So, I feel statements are just a way of communicating that allows you to take responsibility for your own feelings. But it also gives you the opportunity to suggest or ask for what you would prefer that person do. So, what we really want to, and this is really important when you're communicating something that's not so good, because you want to avoid blaming. When people feel like you attacking them and you're blaming them, they're not going to respond in a very nice way. And I be trying to tell my ladies is, when they be going off on a man, is you cannot be like, you, and you do this and you do that and expect that man to sit there and listen to you. He's going to shut down. He's going to get defensive. And then the conversation goes nowhere. I understand you're mad. So something we need to consider, which I'm going to talk about after this I feel statement, is like, what do we need to do in order to have a good conversation? Which is being aware of what type of mood we're in. All right? If you pissed off, that may not be the best time to have a conversation. Let yourself calm down a little bit. But I feel statements are great because you get to explain the impact that person's behavior has on you, but you also get to take responsibility for your emotions, because it's very easy to say that you made me feel this way. You made me do this. You made me angry. You made me sad. No, I feel sad XYZ. So, there are a few rules to I feel statements. The first one is I feel must be followed by a feeling word, an emotion, angry, sad, disappointed, worried, concerned. You want to use this in a soft and even tone, okay? Because if you yelling, I feel, that it goes nowhere. It means nothing because your delivery is just jacked, all right? So you want to use a nice calm tone. You want to avoid being accusatory. You don't start the statement with you. And then in your explanation, you can just gently describe how the other person's actions have affected you, and you're going to use a 4-part sentence structure. So it's going to go, I feel, you're going to insert a word. Then you're going to say when, you're going to describe the problem behavior. Then, I feel when, because. So what is the consequence of that person's actions on you? And how does the problem behavior affect you? That's pretty much what you're answering in that part. And then you're going to finish it off with I want, need, or would like, and you're going to offer your preference to the current behavior. So let's give you an example so you can tie it all together. So blaming sounds like, you can't keep coming home so late without calling. It's so inconsiderate. Heard that? That ain't sound too nice, right? It ain't sound too pleasant. The I feel statement will go, I feel annoyed when you come home late without calling because I can't sleep due to being worried about you. I would like for you to call me when you're running behind. So that was nice and smooth. I gave you, I feel annoyed when you come home late without calling. That's the behavior. Because how is it affecting me? I can't sleep. I'm worried about you, boo. I'm worried, so I can't sleep. I would like for you to call me when you know you're going to be late. Simple, to the point. It's very hard for people to refute an I feel statement when done correctly. Okay? So that's just something to keep in your pocket. I know it's hard on the spot. Like I work with a lot of my couples on I feel statements, paraphrasing back. When you're used to communicating the same way for a very long time, it is so difficult to get out of that. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible. So, to wrap up, I also want to mention, stop here real quick before I go there. Oh, sorry, y'all. I just got a lot going on. Our environment, yes, affects our communication, but our culture does too. Think about how it is like as a Chicagoan, we communicate a certain type of way. People say Chicagoans communicate aggressively, and I'm not gonna lie, we probably do, most of us. And I think that's just how we grew up. But I know for me, like at my old job, we had a lot of clients who came from out of state, right? So even just in what we find to be appropriate, even as body language, in other cities and states, they walking around smiling and they just randomly speak to you, hey, and stuff like that. You do that in Chicago, we're going to look at you like, what do you want? Or what's wrong with you? Or, like we be skeptical of stuff like that. So because I wasn't like this smiley, hey, person, in certain workspaces, people would just find a problem with that. And it's like, that's just not who I am. But I'm not being rude. I'm not being mean. I'm not ignoring you. So why is that a problem? But that's just something else to consider. It's like, I would realize like when we would get clients from like New York, they wouldn't pay me no mind. Because New York, they kind of got a similar vibe as far as how they communicate. They don't take little stuff like that personally. But like you get a person from down south who's very big on hospitality and like being smiley and all of that, like they're going to think you have an attitude with them when you just telling them, you just giving them a directive. So, again, thinking about who is receiving your message, which leads me into the nice conclusion of this video. So, how can we be a better communicator? Number one, we want to consider who is the receiver, right? So, let's just go with a weight loss scenario. If I'm a man and I want to tell my girl that I feel like she is gaining some weight, And because I love her, and maybe she don't notice it or we haven't talked about it, you know, this is a slippery slope already, but this is the first example that came to mind. You want to think about, how can I say this in a sensitive way, in a way that considers my partner's feelings? Not somebody off the street. You know, not somebody whose feelings you don't really care about, but like your partner. Hey babe, you know, I think that I didn't know if you noticed, and it doesn't make me no difference. You think you gained a little weight? Maybe. And again, I don't care. I love you either way. But I just wanted, you know, I didn't want you to look up and be like, oh my God, why did you never tell me that I gained weight? So again, you know, think of catering to your person. That may even look like offering for y'all to start working out together. But you ain't just gonna say, yeah, girl, your ass getting fat. And that's not the good kind of ass getting fat. Like, put down the biscuit. Like, no, you're not gonna do that. So yes, you want to think about, like, who am I trying to get this message to? And that's even like outside of like personal spaces, but like in business. Who is your target audience? How do you want to talk to them? I know that with this YouTube channel, my audience is mainly, you know, Black millennials, probably some other folks out there, but that's who I talk to. So I talk to y'all in a way that feels real to me, that feels personable, that feels relatable. I'm not gonna get on here and talk to you guys like I would in a different space, you know, in a more professional space. Well, now I can do whatever I want because I work for myself damn near. But it's hair. Y'all ever feel like something crawling on y'all? I felt like my life was getting right in. But yeah, so even with your audiences, you want to think about, like, how do I want to say this in a way that feels relatable, you know, that feels true to who I am, all that type of stuff. We want to think about when there are emotions involved. What emotion is taking over, and what are you trying to communicate through that emotion? If I'm angry, then I really need to just take a step back and think about what's beneath this anger. Because most of the time, it's stuff beneath that anger. Hurt, sadness, disappointment, guilt, all of those more uncomfortable emotions. I need to think about what's underneath there. Because if I communicate out of anger, it's probably not going to come out the way that I want to. So I really want my people who struggle with communicating out of anger to learn how to take a step back. Because sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes you don't need to address something in the moment. You need to give yourself a second, maybe more than a second, to come down from the impact of how intense the emotion feels and really think about what you need to say. I'll never forget, I was having which leads me to one of my other points before I go give this example. What method of communication is best? We have to consider that in 2021. We got so many ways to communicate with people. We could text, we could call, you know, we could FaceTime, we email, all these other ways of communicating. And so a lot of times, I know y'all done been in the position where y'all then got into a text argument and you done stood in the same spot for 30 minutes while you at the grocery store because you done got into an argument with somebody. Our anxiety says, deal with this now. Our logic mind needs to say, deal with this when I have a moment, which is not now. Because instead of just waiting till you got home and you had time to address the situation, no, you want to stand in the middle of Jewel and text real fast for 30 minutes. We can't do that. So we have to consider, like, when is it best to put a conversation on pause, to take a step back. I had fell out a little bit with a friend and I was so caught off guard. It started off via text, like it was cool, and then all of a sudden it just got real intense, real fast. And I, at a certain point, me and her, one of us should have decided, like, let's table this and talk in person. Let's have a phone call, a FaceTime, because when it came to text, I wasn't reading all of what she was saying. I'm sure she wasn't reading all of what I was saying. It became about getting our point across, which made it completely unproductive. And then what ends up happening, especially for a person like me who can't just leave stuff like that, Once I had some time to calm down and really process my thoughts, I was able to jot a very, again, because we didn't end on a good note, the whole conversation on the phone or in person just didn't seem, I don't know, if I could have been avoiding it, I don't know. But I was able to at least draft a very nice text message that allowed for me to go back, restate things that I didn't say in a very good way, and allowed me to just further clarify what my feelings were. It was very thorough, and it was true to what I was really trying to say the first time that I didn't say, that ended up coming out all crazy. And so after that, we both were able to walk away with some clarity because we had that second conversation. But sometimes you don't want to have a follow-up conversation to account for the things that came out wrong and all of that. You want to say it right the first time, which means waiting sometimes. Okay? But yes, being aware of like, what am I feeling? And should I be communicating out of this feeling? Probably not. So take a step back. Cope ahead for difficult conversations. If you know that you're getting ready to have a talk with such and such, or tell them something that you know that they're not going to want to hear, or that can bring up, some uncomfortable emotions, you want to think about ahead of time, how do I want to say this? How do I want to conduct myself how do I want to conduct myself in the event that the conversation starts to go left on their end? Because that's something else, is knowing when to bow out. Like, it's one thing when you feel like somebody's provoking you, right? They poking the bear, they poke, and then you just explode and give them what they was looking for. But when you know a person is like that, you need to be prepared for that and decide, all right, so when you got 2 more times to say that, or you got 1 more time to say that, and that's setting a boundary. If you continue to speak to me in this way, I'm going to have to remove myself from this conversation. And maybe we can try again when you're in a different space. That's all it takes, is just giving somebody a disclaimer of how they will or will not talk to you, and deciding, okay, when it's time for you to, all right, well, since we can't do this right now in a way that's comfortable for the both of us, let's try again another time. All right. Assess your mood beforehand. If you already irritated, agitated, annoyed, it's not the time to be having certain conversations. You need to wait till you're in a bit of a better headspace. And that's the thing, right, is just because you are angry at somebody in a moment, that doesn't mean that the anger necessarily disappears over time. But what it will do is it will be less intense. So if I done relaxed, had me a little drink, watch me some TV, talk to my homegirl, I'm probably not as mad as I was when it first started. So now I'm in a bit of a clearer headspace to have a conversation. I'm still upset, but it's not taking over my entire being, And sometimes we need to take a step back and tell people we need time to think. We need time to process. We need time to come to a place where we're ready to answer them or entertain a conversation. That doesn't mean avoid, because some of y'all are good at avoiding because you don't want to deal with conflict or confrontation. No, there is no resolution, without confrontation. Sometimes, like we need to be able to not necessarily see confrontation as like a terrible thing, but it gives us an opportunity to maybe come to a compromise and address something that needs to be addressed. So we have to really consider, like, sometimes if somebody asks you something and you're not in a good space to really like go there, letting them know that and say, hey, can I have some time to think about it? Or, can I get back to you? Even via text message, like, don't feel compelled to get back to them right away. Really formulate your thoughts. How do you want to say what you got to say? Okay? So I ain't gonna hold y'all. I think that's it. All right. So just consider, like, it's more than when people say, I'm a bad communicator. It's more than the fact that, like, you have a difficult time being consistent, texting back and all of that. It really comes down to these foundational things that I've talked about today. So that's something to just think about and consider and understand, like, how can I do better? If I know that I typically fall into like passive aggressive ways or aggressive ways, how do I need to break down my patterns and my habits in order to do better. Because you keep falling in, trying to, that's another thing. Thinking about where your control lies. You cannot control other people. You can't control how they receive you. You cannot control how they take what you say. But you can control you. Like, how being a better communicator is really more so for you than it is for other people. Because that's the thing, right? Is you could say something so eloquently, so calmly, and because it's not what that person wants to hear, they're still going to find a way to be upset about it. But that don't have nothing to do with you. Because you spoke your truth. And you did it in a way that was assertive. That was healthy. We know this with our parents. The moment you challenge them or something like that, you disrespectful. No, I just said something you didn't want to hear. But nothing I said was disrespectful, and I didn't convey it in a disrespectful manner. So that's the thing, is you can't control how other people take you, but that doesn't mean you don't have work to do. So at least know that I said that in the best, most respectful way that I could have said it. And I'm comfortable with how I translated that. Now it's for them to go sit and marinate on, even if they didn't like what I had to say, So yeah, that's it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, all right? And think about what I talked about the next time it's time for you to communicate with somebody, especially somebody you don't like. Them be the worst ones.